How can you personalize your messaging to physicians for greater prescription intent? What are people saying about your brand? How can you make your marketing efforts more precise and effective? These and many more questions are answered on this podcast, which is here to serve as a playbook for all your pharma marketing needs. As your host, Saumya Prakash, co-founder of Multiplier AI Solutions, sits across pharma industry's top experts. This is your place to get all the insights about Gen AI, data, and beyond.
So hello and welcome back to the new episode of the Pharma Marketing Playbook, Data, Gen AI and Beyond. I'm your host Saumya Prakash, and today we are going to delve deep into the intersection of data analytics, AI and the pharma industry. Joining us today is a distinguished guest, Professor Madhu Viswanathan. And Professor Madhu Viswanathan has a rich background in academia and has exposure to diverse industries including pharma. He is renowned for his expertise in analytical skills, statistical and econometric modeling, data analytics, and market research. He has executed several projects in the past with leading multinational clients. Professor Madhu has done his PhD from the University of Minnesota, Carlson School of Management, and has done his graduation from BITS Pilani. Today he is here to share his valuable perspectives on how data and AI are shaping the future of pharma. So welcome to the show, Professor Viswanathan, and we are thrilled to have you with us today. How are you doing?
Hi Saumya, thanks for having me over. It's a pleasure being here, and I'm very excited to talk about an industry that I really like, and of course the area that I have been working for the last 15 years.
Great. So to start with, since you have been in the industry and at the helm of data and AI, how have you seen the evolution of data analytics and its applications change over the last few years in pharma?
That's a great question actually. So I've been associated with this industry now for the last decade or so, and there's been a marked change as such, right? So if you think about data in the past, pharma always had access to structured data, which was essentially, what did the salesperson do, what visits. You also had clinical data. So there was always a lot of structured data that was available. And depending on which part of pharma you're in. Now, I come from a business background, so I've focused mainly on the marketing and sales aspect of it. So I work a lot on contract design, Salesforce management, compensation plans. And so you would get a lot of rich data in terms of how many doctor visits you went, what kind of material was sent, what content, and so on. So the data was always there, but you wouldn't call it necessarily analytics per se, at least in the past. People used to have a very simplistic way of looking at data. What I've seen over the last few years especially is the growing importance of using this data to provide insights. And I think that is where the advances in machine learning, AI, AI might be still a buzzword and not everybody might be using it per se, but it has definitely increased the salience of insights from data. And I think that's a very positive way to look at how the field has been advancing. So where we are right now, I think if you look at the distribution, people talk about where you are on the digital journey, the roadmap and all that, right? I think quite a lot of firms are still in the old space, in the sense that they're still working with Excel sheets, they still have data which don't talk to each other. So it is very hard for you to, figure out and stitch together an understanding across different campaigns or across different points in time. So that would be around 25 to 30% of the population. But the ones that are really looking to grow and advance are ones which have now figured out that they need to have more insights. And there you'll actually see a majority of the firms, like the rest 70% at various stages, are using data to generate insights which are then feeding into their compensation plans, their marketing campaigns, and predictive, performance analytics, everything right now. And so there is a good set of them who are doing that.
You're right. So traditionally, pharma has been a little slower adopter of technology as compared to some of the other industries in general. And data has always been siloed. I think that's a typical pattern that we see because of the entire, from supply to the marketing end chain. It's always been a challenge for integrating the things. But you're right, we are also witnessing a change in how people are now perceiving data. So you mentioned that the companies are using the insights to drive their compensation plans and their market research, and also productizing or commercializing various pharma drugs. So if you have any specific examples, if you could share how they actually did the analysis or they utilize the insights, some of these examples that would help our listeners.
Gladly. So I can talk to you about a few of the projects that I've been part of. And so these are large pharma companies. I worked with both in the US and in the Indian context as well. And in one, it was essentially looking at activity-based incentives, trying to figure out if that is actually leading to a change in performance per se for the salesperson. And the other thing they were trying to figure out is who should you incentivize? Should you incentivize the frontline salesperson or should you be incentivizing the frontline sales manager? And we were able to use a lot of the data that they had provided, and we were able to come up with predictions and estimates of where the real impact was. And what our study essentially ended up showing, and which was very useful to the firm, which then went on to implement it, is that from a company perspective, the company was much better off incentivizing the managers as opposed to the salesperson. The effects were similar, but just from a cost perspective, it was better for the company to just incentivize the sales managers, and they were able to get better profits. So that was one. There was another one which is just looking at, which is looking at the role of tournaments that are used in compensation design. So as people in this industry might be familiar with, sales contests and sales rank tournaments are very common within the pharma industry to drive up sales for certain product lines and so on. So what we're trying to figure out here is disentangle the role of essentially the monetary incentive versus social effects. So we're trying to disentangle the role of monetary versus social reputational effects. So does it really matter if I pay you money or whether you get shown on the first page? Now, what we're finding, and this is interesting again, is there is a lot of disutility in being the last person out there. So I'll do everything to not be the last person or be on the last page. And so it's not about winning. It's just not being the last person out there. And so we are again able to use a lot of data-based insights. And now underlying this is machine learning models which are able to predict what would you do in different circumstances, and then how your responses would be if we changed compensation plans. And so this is just one setup of mine. But of course, if you look into actual more detailed setup, right? If you think about marketing campaigns now, and these are some of the things that you are also doing, right? In the sense that if you think in terms of whom to target, okay, with the kind of data that we have now, you're able to pinpoint and give personalized recommendations and say these are certain HCPs whom you should be able to target with a certain content. So you're getting personalized content recommendations based on what kind of HCP is, who they are in the network, and how they are, what kind of clientele they're getting, what their recommendation history is, and so on. So it's been that kind of journey, and I've seen quite a lot of firms doing that as well.
Right, you're right. So yeah, for sales with so many feet on the ground and the huge amount of salespeople and the humongous cost associated, if analytics is being used, that's I think definitely a lot of things to learn from those researches that that I've come across. And you also mentioned about the marketing aspect. That's pretty interesting about the ranking, because I think digital marketing has become so much pertinent today, and physicians also value it, that they should get the relevant messages, they should get what's important for them. They don't want to be bombarded by omni-channel communications. And how does your research support the change in the behavior of a physician, how he is responding to marketing today?
Yeah. See, I think in the West also getting physician FaceTime is an issue. In India, it's definitely a big issue, right? There are reports which talk about an average physician spends less than a minute with the salesperson or the agent out there. And so, given that FaceTime is so valuable, I think the only way to get your message across nowadays has to be through a digital medium. And which is why I think what I'm seeing, at least on the ground, is a lot of complementary efforts. And, of course, these are also side effects of the COVID phenomenon, right? Like, people have realized that there are some information that can be relayed digitally. And you're seeing a lot of digital uptake. I've seen some very cool applications, not in pharma per se, but in associated healthcare, right? So I've seen doctors give out, pre-surgery, post-surgery care advices, videos digitally. I've also now started seeing digital avatars or generated AI-based people giving you this kind of information. And so you're seeing a lot of those practices being implemented. One of the coolest applications I thought, at least in the sales context, was there are these opening emails that you send to doctors talking about your product. And the firm that I was working with essentially had their salespeople create videos, and of course part of it was generated as well, and then use that to send messages to the doctor. So the email had a video link where the salesperson had a personalized message for the doctor talking about the product and so on. So this is this nice combination of technology and existing sales approaches. But of course, here's where personalization of data comes in, right? You need to know the doctor's name. You need to know what the doctor's interests are. So it doesn't sound like it's a very general, tailored message that you could have recorded once and sent it off. So I think this is what technology helps us do, right? Achieve customization at scale. And you're seeing a lot of that now.
Right. You're right. And when speaking of personalization, a lot of these pharma companies operate in so many countries, and even personalizing them with the language and context and the cultural way of putting the things, it goes such a long way in building that rapport. And it's ironical but true that we are more and more surrounded by AI bots, but still we connect with a human touch much more than before. So yeah, definitely that's something I think which maybe next 4 or 5 years we'll see that more and more. I think contextual messaging and such kind of connects would become commonplace.
Correct. And from a future perspective, right, I also see a co-pilot like setup coming for a sales agent, right? Doctors have queries. Doctors, if a patient asks something, right, the doctors keep note of it, and a lot of times they may not have the answers for it right away. And so something which offers doctors the ability to, dig deeper into your product without having to call you up is one very good resource. And I can see a lot of co-pilot based things which use GPT or any of these generative large language models to answer questions which are very specific, right? And of course the danger here is you can't use these large language models as they are now, because we know that there is a risk of hallucination, that there is no independence across statements as such, right? The same question asked multiple times can give you different types of answers, same flavor, but again different versions of those answers. And so in a regulated industry, there must be checks and balances on what can be said versus what can't be said. So I do see a human in the loop kind of a system on this, but definitely one where you're getting a lot of queries answered in a more real-time setup.
Right. So you mentioned about hallucinations. I think that is one of the key challenges which pharma has, being so regulated and it can have an immense impact if anything, wrongly is presented. So hallucination is definitely one of the challenges which even we have faced as a concern from our client. What else do you feel could be a challenge or a roadblock in the implementation of AI into their mainstream operations?
Yeah, but I see this is always the case, right? There are pros and cons to everything that is there. I think the pros here outweigh the cons, and like I also work with the fintech industry, and that is again a regulated industry, and where you'll have to really look into what is being said, what you can cannot do. So there are other regulated industries, and I think people are figuring out solutions to work with. As of now, it is not clear what they are, but I do see a way forward. I think the pros definitely outweigh the cons in this. Hallucinations, yes, is a concern. I think the large language models themselves are working on it. So hopefully technology will improve over the span of next few years that we're able to reduce the incidence of hallucinations. But people are also coming up with alternate checks and balance mechanisms. Like I said, the human in the loop is a very simple way of ensuring that whatever is going out is the human in the loop is a easy way of ensuring that whatever is being said is correct and is consistent with what needs to be said, right? You can check for hallucinations and other things with an additional layer that takes care of this.
Right. And most of these organizations, I think not only the top rung but the middle level also, do you feel that the data capture is sufficient for being able to train these models going forward, or there is still a gap?
Yeah, I think so. This is just coming from what I've seen, right? A lot of times what happens is technology adoption or technology purchase happens at the top, but adoption happens at the bottom. And so capturing data is something that most people don't like, especially if it is forced on you, right? But it's very hard for people to naturally adopt. And so unless there's a lot of push from the top, and going back to your question, I think there isn't enough incentives for mid-management to capture the data as well as they would like. And partly because they're not yet seeing value from this, right? This is again the chicken and egg issue you face, right? I need data to show you value, but you will not start collecting the data in a proper sense unless you show me value. So people keep going around in circles, and which is where leadership, top management comes in. So I've seen in firms where a lot of times if CIOs, all they're doing is ensuring that we have purchased a certain software or implemented certain things as a check mark on their resume, it doesn't seem to work. The minute there is change, there is always pushback within the organization on what needs to be done. But if they're able to incentivize, like saying, look, I understand that this is a problem. This is going beyond the scope of what we envisioned your workplace as. And so we're willing to work with you in sweetening the pot. Then I've seen a much better adoption, and then firms ending up figuring out value from that. Yeah, so, I'm not a big fan of leadership, but leadership is very useful in making these big changes happen.
On the ground, right. So do you foresee that going forward, maybe the required number of manual salespeople or the medical representatives would go down and be replaced with people who are more AI empowered, with a virtual assistant? Or how do you see, or the same number of people the industry would still require? How do you see that change?
So I don't see the people being replaced. I see them as being more focused. They will have more complementary skills. See, the level of information that people get nowadays about their clients is amazing. One of the people I was talking to, the salespeople, a person, by the time he walks into the doctor or a HCP's office, has a clear history of what the HCP has done so far and what their interests are, both from an online perspective and also from their offline touch points and everything else. And they're able to deliver at a rate which is unprecedented, right? If I only have a few minutes with you, and if I'm able to give you exactly what you want, That is what is efficient. That's what efficiency is all about. And the rest of things I can digitally deliver nowadays. And so to me, I think this is going to change the role of a salesperson or a representative. So there is a little bit of relearning, upskilling that will have to happen because it is all changes are disruptive. And in that sense, there will be some people who are going to be against the change as well. But I see this as a net positive because you can make better use of your time. And one of the things that I always think of is again lead qualification, right? It's such a huge problem in pharma, especially if you think in terms of coverage and everything else. And if I can even improve that by a few percentage points using technology and everything else, that is helping the salesperson get better. So this is a non-pharma example. This is very interesting. And again, it's a data example. So it's a firm that essentially gets leads both online and offline. And the salesperson here is, of course, being incentivized based on commissions on sales. Okay, so that's the main incentive compensation. That's the main compensation that they have. And once they introduce this online lead-based thing, there was a lot of pushback by the sales team. And the pushback was essentially most of these leads are noise, they're not great. And so they were rejecting these online leads at a much higher rate than what the online team was expecting. Now, this is where technology comes in, right? So the online team was able to actually spatially figure out. They went back to the data, they looked at the rejected leads, and then were able to spatially figure out why this rejection was happening. So it turns out that essentially it was a function of where these leads were compared to where the salesperson was. So the salesperson, if you think about offline leads, right, usually he will talk to the person, like if you are a customer, he'll try to get referrals from you, and your referrals are probably going to be in the same geographic area. And so it's going to be very close to each other. Whereas these online leads can be anywhere. When you say geographic region, it's pretty big geographic region, right? It can be on different paths. And so the salesperson was rejecting a lot of these leads based on convenience aspect. Okay, and there's also this thing that salespeople's bias is there, where they always feel like they understand the customers a lot better. So these online leads are all noise, whereas I can get more money by just working on my leads, right? But the team was able to figure out digitally that this was going on, right? So they used technology, figured it out. So then they pushed it onto the managers, who then made these salespeople work on online leads as well. So they could not reject online leads at the rate at which they were doing before. And guess what? Okay, the salespeople started making a lot more in sales. So this goes back to this chicken and egg I was telling you about, right? About value and then getting data on it. Once they started working on these online leads, they found out that they were much easier to convert. And because they were being paid on commissions on sales, they were earning a lot more than they were before. See, online leads are very much intent based, right? I'm coming to you and I'm filling up a form and saying I'm interested in you, which is much higher intent than just knocking on somebody's door and saying, hey, your friend referred me and they have a great service. But it's hard to break these things, and this is where an interaction of technology and everything came in to say, hey, look, we can change behavior. But you can see how there was a push required to move the salesperson to a different setup and so on. So I think you will get these organizational frictions where people are going to be more reticent or less willing to accept change, especially with technology that is, it feels as if it's taking away your job, but in fact it might be helping you.
It's a fantastic example, and this brings into perspective what seems so obvious in terms of the distance factor and the sales disqualifying could be just kind of a game changer for the company. And these are, I think, facts that sometimes the data team or the sales team in general, I think, might just overlook had it not been for that particular digital team. So it's a fantastic example, and thanks for sharing that. Definitely, there are a lot of hurdles, as you mentioned, for the industry, and there might be some changes that we will have to see. But what are the quick wins? If I ask you for the pharma industry, or a couple of giants or mid-zone clients who are looking at actually making now a change, what are few areas where they would see an immediate impact if they adopt data analytics?
I, I think digital marketing is an obvious one. Okay, I think digital marketing they should adopt wholeheartedly. I think the market is still at a point where you can enter without expending a lot of money, and so in that sense, it's an easy win as far as I'm concerned. It's a regulated industry, so you have to be careful about how you go about doing it, but it's an easy win once you start adopting it. I think the other easy wins are moving over to digital forms of delivery. So this can be sending out informational content either through a chatbot based setup, or it can be a video of your salesperson talking about different products and so on. So that again is an easy win. The last part where the actual sales happen, right? I think that is going to change over time as people start seeing more and more value from these interactions. Like you said, right? People still want to have the human feel to things, and so the salesperson will still have to go there. But with repeat customers, I think it's much easier. I think one of the people I was talking to, I was talking about how you could create materials for doctors itself, because a lot of times if it's a new product, the doctor is, let's say, is prescribing to a patient, the patient himself might have or herself might have a lot of questions which can be very easily answered by the salesperson saying, here's a company video about this product, it gives you details, and here's a website, associated website that you can go have a GPT based thing. Company can collect a lot of data on what kind of queries they're getting so that they can rectify it, and this can be a very useful loop to build it. Right, so in that sense, to me, any kind of information dissemination that can happen both to HCPs and to end patients are very easy wins in this space. In the back end, better targeting, better selection of HCPs, better market potential identification using data. So all of this again with ML and all is very standard things now, and if you're not doing it, you're doing a disservice to yourself by not implementing these. I think these are all very easy wins.
Right. No, thank you so much. I think India is always on a faster track as compared to the corporate. So I kind of represent the other side. So I know it's very hard for very large companies, and all the challenges and hurdles have to be met. But definitely the research and the academia and people like you can show us how it can be done, though it may take some time and effort. But the fruits and the impact of it is definitely kind of worth it. So would you like to give us any further takeaways or any closing thoughts on this podcast? It's been very rich experience talking to you today.
Yeah, I think this has been great, but I think takeaways for me is, I think when we think of pharma, right? Pharma plays such a huge role in our overall well-being itself, right? If you take it from a public policy perspective, and given that we are in India, I feel like pharma can do so much more to reach more people using a lot of the technology that we've been talking about. Pharma has instituted a lot of practice which are very useful also. So we're working with a non-profit, which is again looking at, it's a public-private partnership of sorts to improve adoption from a public health perspective. And they've adopted a lot of the pharma-based business models, and we are finding that it has immense potential to transform lives as such. And so in that sense, I think pharma can play a role beyond just selling drugs, right? The innovations that are happening in the pharma industry can go over and beyond just pharma. I think leaders in this space should start thinking of themselves in that space and say, okay, look, we can actually transform lives and industries in ways that we didn't envision.
Yeah, I think post-COVID, I think the role of pharma and the role of medicines and COVID vaccines has kind of, made it clear that this is, it's extremely important to overhaul the whole thing. And it's been really wonderful, sharing with you all these experiences and how much impact we could drive by implementing digital marketing, market research, and the AI trends in pharma. So thank you so much for your valuable time, and we look forward to hearing again from your research and on basis of your emerging trends. So thank you once again, and thank you all the listeners for joining us today on this podcast.
Thank you for joining us in this episode. We hope that the deep insights and knowledge shared today will help your business and brand grow by leaps and bounds. Remember to follow the podcast. And if you wish to know more about Multiplier AI solutions, please visit the links given in show notes.